Hello, hello, guys. I am so excited to be back a week later. My name is Sarah McKinnon, and I am an OCD and mental health advocate. And I am super honored and privileged to be chatting with you guys today and answering all your OCD related questions. If you did not catch me last week, I will give a little introduction to myself. I am 22 years old. I live in the middle of Connecticut, but I previously lived for 4 years in New York City. I work as a full time art director in the health industry, so I have a lot of close space to public health and what it means to be an advocate in the NGO space and all those things. And I think I want to kick off by just giving like a brief overview of my OCD history, just so we can start creating some similarities together and can really channel the questions towards my area of expertise and what I've experienced. Um, I particularly suffer with harm OCD in particular, as well as responsibility OCD, and occasionally, depending on a life circumstance, responsibility and relationship correlated OCD. And I am also a suicide survivor. After going through the worst throes of harm OCD. For me, I've actually had OCD since I was pretty much a baby, 3 years old. But unfortunately, because of the education that we have in the mental health community, regardless if it was 10 years ago or today, I actually did not get diagnosed for OCD until I was 21 years old in a really bad space in life. And that's actually pretty normal. It takes, on average, 17 years for someone to get diagnosed properly for OCD. So I had a very long and hard journey, and I was constantly debilitated. And I grew up very sick, dry heaving from anxiety and panic attacks. And I missed a lot of school. I ruminated a lot, and I didn't know what the cause was. So it really is a full circle for me to be still sitting here with you today, thanks to the advocacy of so many others that shared their story and honestly saved my life. And I feel very privileged to be able to create more noise and conversation in this space. So I'm gonna run into the first question. This one caught my eye immediately. Megan, hi. You write that you have a fear of going crazy and losing your mind and or having a panic attack and needing to be checked into a psych ward. Any suggestions on ERP for this fear? Let me tell you, this was exactly what kicked it off the bat for me and what ran me into getting a specialist. I was having a very bad season. I had multiple forms of OCD related attacks. I would lock myself in the bathroom. I would throw knives away as frequent as I could because I was so afraid of harming someone. And I truly thought I was going insane and I was going crazy. Um, I was pretty convinced that if I was to pursue time with a therapist, if I told them these thoughts, that I would get locked up and go to jail and be put in a straitjacket and put in some like movie centric cinematic place in my head for like a psych ward. And that is not the truth, and that is not the reality. So I just want to encourage anyone listening that if you have this fear of expressing your OCD related thoughts and this OCD rumination on going insane or going crazy, I just want to encourage you that that is not the case for most of you. That's part of your OCD playing tricks, and that can actually be a huge difference between someone starting therapy and getting the right type of professional help. So, first, if you're having those fears and thoughts, it is entirely normal. Do not worry. Please take the first step in seeking ERP in particular if you haven't already. But for me, I had a panic attack on this constantly. And eventually I got the courage to seek an OCD specialist. And I explained this fear. And this is kind of how it came out. And I'll tell you the ERP that tailored it pretty nicely. I remember sitting in front of the specialist. It was the first time I was in front of an OCD person. And I'm explaining all this. And oh my gosh, you're going to lock me up. And I'm afraid. And like, I'm insane. I must be a serial killer because a reminder, I was dealing with harm OCD. And he looked at me and he said, well, what if you are a serial killer? And I about passed out in the chair. I was so freaked out. I realized he was just not giving me reassurance. And he was exercising ERP right then and there, 5 minutes in, which was insane, but amazing. And he was clearly definitely knew what he was doing. Once I kind of understood what he was getting at, I realized that that was a normal reassurance. And you kind of going through that rumination cycle of being worried about you're losing your mind or what ERP to get and kind of going through the anxieties of that. my number one tip, lean into your specialist. They are trained more than I will ever be. They are trained more than anyone else giving you advice in your life and potentially feeding you reassurance to guide you through that process and tailor an ERP program that's not just from a textbook, but it's for you and your triggers and your childhood and your past experiences. My harm OCD is connected to a lot of things as I grew up and in my current age, and all those things play a role. So I can't say there's a specific ERP for you, but things that were very effective for me in general were communicating around me that reassurance can feed my OCD for my closest people, so my significant other, my parents, and making sure that they weren't feeding that reassurance. So that's like a really great first step if you're just starting your ERP journey, is to bring your closest people and say, I need help with this. And here are some boundaries we need to set and some conversations that we need to have to make sure I'm getting treatment outside of my treatment. So that's the first thing I did. And the second thing that's really beneficial is, for me, that was flooding scripts. If you're not familiar with flooding scripts, they may have different names depending on your therapist, but it's essentially where you write down a script or a story or a written prose on like your worst fear realized, and your OCD being true, that you are, in this case, going crazy, that you are losing your insanity. And those are very effective for me as well. But everyone's different. Your specialist is going to know how to handle that and what's best for you. So I'm going to jump in. You guys are asking some amazing questions. I'm going to run out of time. It'd be so sad that I can't talk to all of you. Okay. Hi, Daily Arca. I remember you from last week. Thanks for popping back in. It's great to keep talking with you. Does it get harder to realize what is and isn't OCD the more you do compulsions? My current theme has gotten so confusing and elaborate that I don't even know what's a genuine fear and what's OCD anymore. This is so relatable. um, Again, I can only speak to my own time with particularly harm, responsibility, relationship OCD recently. But what I can say is that OCD is tricky. And that cycle that we go through, no matter how much we study it, no matter how much therapy we go through, it's still really hard to understand. And once you acknowledge OCD coexists in your space and you live with OCD, it can be a struggle to not fall into the trap of identifying what OCD is and what OCD isn't, including compulsions, including rumination, including intrusive thoughts, including your anxiety or your panic attacks. And I think my OCD's biggest like weapon at me always, and this kind of relates to our previous question, is what is OCD and what is not OCD? Here's the fun part, guys. We're never going to truly know because OCD does not want to reveal itself that it's OCD. It is a doubting condition and it loves to be tricky and elaborate. And I believe that OCD is almost like a breathing thing. It goes with you as you grow. It finds new triggers. And for me, mine has mutated since when I was 3 to now being 22. So I just want to encourage you again, what I talked about a little bit last week is coexisting with your OCD and accepting that space. And even if you don't think it's OCD talking, or you do, still try not to lean into that reassurance and still keep using your tools every single day and try not to get caught up on what OCD isn't and what it is, because OCD is going to try to trick you when you're down, when you're at your lower points, when you are most confused. Continue doing the work. Don't let this be a deterrent for you to run away from therapy. And also, when life gets really good and your therapy is being really effective and you're just cruising, also don't run away from your therapy. It means your therapy and your treatment plan is probably going really well, and that's awesome. So continue the path, continue the work. Don't let up. Look at it kind of like your exercise for your physical body, if you're a runner or if you work out. I look at it the same way. It is a part of my self-awareness. It's part of my self-wellness. And it is confusing. What you're experiencing is, from my perspective, is completely normal and genuine. And try not to get caught up in identifying what is real and what isn't when it comes to your OCD talking. I find exercising a healthy coexisting space is the best thing that we can do. And knowing that it is a part of your life now. It is with you for as long as it can be, and that is okay. And you can have a very successful, thriving life with OCD for sure. And from what I've experienced so far. Hi, let's go on to the next thought. So, I don't think intrusive thoughts define me, but I still feel traumatized and guilty from the sexual things OCD has made me think. How do I get over it? Now, I've only had a handful of sexual intrusive thoughts, but I have had them. And what I can say is, I have an extra layer of this for those out there who have a spiritual path. I'm a Christian, and I can understand where you're coming from because sometimes I have intrusive thoughts and I relate them, my guilt to sin, and my thoughts there. So I'm also going to speak to that community if you're listening. Intrusive thoughts are distressing and they're exhausting. And it is really hard to create an identity sometimes outside of intrusive thoughts, including that analysis of that internal monologue that we have in relation to our morals and what we love most and who we are as a person and how we paint a picture of ourselves. And for me, I think the biggest thing is I am not my OCD. I am not my intrusive thoughts. I am not my panic attacks. I am not any of those things. And I am my own person with my own heart, with my own goals, with my own dreams. And this is a condition that I have. It is a processing, and that is it. It doesn't mean that I am a good or bad person. I'm just a good person that bad things has happened to. And the second I started looking at OCD and intrusive thoughts more as an annoyance, my guilt, and in my case, my relation to sin really started dropping down. Because while OCD is a part of you, I do look at it as like a separate piece of myself, an uncontrollable knee jerk reaction, if you will. And there's plenty of people out there who have intrusive thoughts that are sexual, that are harmful, that are all of the things, and they might not have OCD. OCD people, we just get kind of hung up in the process and we stay in that space and we give it importance. And that is where OCD gets its power from, is where it puts the importance. And just a reminder, OCD goes after the things we love most, in my opinion. So if you're struggling with harm thoughts or sexual thoughts, it's targeting a part that you really admire or care about yourself, or you're trying to explore, you're trying to figure out, and it really enjoys going after those vulnerable pieces. So I really like to twist the narrative, and I'm like, you know what, OCD, you're just being annoying. These intrusive thoughts are annoying. I don't need to feel guilty because I know who I am. And I know what I'm made of, and I know what I'm going to do in this world. And I'm going to keep going to therapy. I'm going to keep doing exposure therapy, and I'm going to beat this down. And you are not who I am. And I think a good counteract for me personally is I focus a lot on gratitude. And y'all, sometimes OCD attacks so much, it's exhausting. It's exhausting to be grateful. It's exhausting to be thankful. And for me, sometimes it's exhausting to praise God when I'm in the worst throes of my OCD in my case. And if seeing like keeping a gratitude journal seems like too much for you and you're like, I cannot take that step, just have a moment in your mind where you're thinking of all the things you're grateful for, the people around you, and what you're grateful for about yourself and your strong suits. And if you can, write those things down and remind yourself what defines you. And it's going to depower that OCD, which I think is super, super important. So those are just my quick tips. Those are what I do almost on a daily basis, which is what I recommend. I am trying to avoid reassurance-based questions, so if you wanna give me a second, guys. Okay. I have a massive fear of depression/suicide. I am not suicidal by any means, but I keep internally analyzing my emotions to see whether I'm happy. What would you suggest for internal compulsions? So most of my compulsions, almost all of them with my harm OCD, responsibility, relationship, are internal. They're my monologue in my head, what I focus on. And guys, that's such a hard place to be. And I just want to kind of give like a shout of praise to you guys who are dealing with internal compulsions, whether it's today or you have in the past. You are facing a huge thing. You are doing something quite amazing, kind of dealing with that monologue in your head. So I just think that like if you've gone through that path, like give yourself a pat on the back for a second because you've really done what so many people will never truly understand or appreciate. And I can promise you that learning how to navigate this internal compulsion part of OCD is really going to give you a lot of life skills that I've been able to implement and help other people with. So, like if you're acknowledging that and you're dealing with that, my heart goes out to you because this is a daily thing for me. Um, as I mentioned in the beginning, I am a suicide survivor. I was driven to suicide because of the complexity and the pain of my harm OCD, and I really felt like that was the only option for me, and I just wanted to be relieved from pain, and my whole life grew up saying, "I'm not going to ever be suicidal, I'm not I don't want to take that path of suicide. I was brought up in a lot of healthy conversations about it from my parents, and so I get this. Like I to my extent, I understand the fear. However, I also want to encourage you that this dialogue you're having about happiness and your fear of suicide may be a form of rumination, and these may be intrusive thoughts. So I don't want to give you reassurance here, and I would definitely encourage you to bring this to your therapist or your specialist so you can get equipped exposure responses to help you tackle these. Um, but I just want to encourage the second part of this question is about happiness. And I love that I'm seeing this in the same question because I believe happiness is my suggestion for internal compulsions. So, just like the last two questions, internal compulsions to me is a really reflection of my mental processing system. And we have a lot of control over that. And we have so much control that we don't have over that, but we wish we did. So again, this kind of comes back to coexisting with your OCD and acknowledging that these intrusive thoughts you're having about depression or suicide or harm or whatnot, these are your intrusive thoughts, but you can coexist with your OCD and have a separate bucket for happiness. And we're not a numeric system, guys. Just because you have a depressive thought or an intrusive thought, it doesn't cancel out your happiness. And that's just something I want to remind you because I really believed that for the longest time that they were coexisting and they were like too much connected. And if I was too intrusive or too depressed, so that my happiness kind of got tossed out. Um, you can have these thoughts and still pursue happiness as best to your ability, but while you go through the thick of exposure therapy and the thick of dealing with these thoughts, happiness can be hard to come by, and you can have amazing days and you can have really hard days. So, I think your first step outside of exposure therapy is really defining our expectations on happiness and really figuring out am I dealing with a fantastical expectation or am I dealing with the reality expectation of what I can control today and really implementing things that make you happy and that this is like these are things that are comfortable to me. These are things that I can reward myself with as I go through exposure therapy. But ultimately, like to navigate this question, it really takes the proper therapist and exposure therapist. And I'm telling you, the internal monologue and these compulsions are possible. I've been able to depower my thoughts by really two things, or maybe three, focusing on my happiness in a new way, working through exposure therapy by, pleading the fifth is what I call it. So not leaning into the certainty of this thought or the non-certainty. I just say, I don't know. Like, I can or cannot deny this thought. So not powering the rumination cycle as best I can are really the two tools that I use. And just looking at it as annoying, like this is not a definite fact, and I'm going to move forward from this. And I find that helps me outside of my exposure therapy, but that's going to be your best tool for success. I went through this. Hi. Your question. My OCD is attacking the OCD process and telling me that you are not allowed to do ERP. This sounds so dumb. I am trying to sit with my anxiety and do nothing, but it is hard. I feel like the fear is, and it might not let me, being stuck with OCD forever. Okay, so I definitely endured this in my beginning seasons of exposure therapy and really just my beginning seasons of seeing a therapist. I really took therapy on not a serious way until I started actually addressing my OCD. So I really did start therapy later in life. So I was also adapting to that therapy process and what that means and navigating like the social stigma of it. And I definitely went through my OCD trying to talk me out of ERP as well. And I just want to start by saying, you have parentheses. This is so dumb. And I love to preface and say sorry a lot, but this is not a dumb question. And what you're experiencing, this intrusive thought, is not dumb. It's pretty common. So don't give into the power of your OCD by like, if you need to ask a question, like, don't feel shame for that. Like, we're all here for you. We're here to support you and be an advocate for you. Nothing you ask is dumb. No intrusive thought is more important than you as a person. And everyone here really, I believe, are strong individuals. So let's want to start with that. First, I hope, and I'm trying to interpret this correctly, that your ERP is happening with a therapist. So in the essence of like you're already going through the exposure process and your OCD is telling you can't do ERP, then the combat to that would be pursuing your ERP. If you haven't started that process and this is a thought process that's holding you back from starting, I think that this is really, I hope this is your sign today to go and pursue exposure therapy and take that first step and express this intrusive thought process with the therapist if you're able and say, hey, like my OCD is trying to prevent me from therapy. And here's why I think that. and really like inviting a space for not just your therapist, but for your OCD. And when we create that space, that like metaphorical space for your OCD to really show itself and all the sides and dimensions, I find it's easier to construct a really healthy treatment process and to see all sides of it and maybe what it's connected to, a trigger or maybe an incident that happened in your life or a certain like moment in a day that's really like inflaming that particular thought process. And while showing all sides as if it's like a three-dimensional figure, we're able to um, set up our treatment for success. That includes your therapist being aware of this for you. And the second part is OCD and forever is honestly the truth, at least for me. I can't speak for anyone else here, but to me, the first step of starting therapy was leveling expectations about what I had. For me, and my definition of OCD is that it's a chronic condition, it is a disorder, and it is lifelong. And to my knowledge, there is no cure for OCD. However, cure does not have to be the end all for having a happy and functional life. And I no longer look at myself as a girl stuck with OCD. I look at myself as a girl who has a disability and I do have limitations and I have certain needs that other people may not have, but I am still powerful with OCD. And OCD does not define who I am. Neither do my exposures or the types of intrusive thoughts that I have. So, for starters, if you're on the fence about starting your ERP, I want to encourage you that today is the day to start. It was the best decision I ever made. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. I had so much anxiety and panic attacks. I really needed to lean into the support around me, which at times was no support or very little. And your life will be better for it. And you're going to start realizing that OCD and forever just means coexisting with a disorder. It doesn't mean that you're going to be in an anxiety induced state the rest of your life. And treatment is out there and a new life is out there for you and a new thought process. So here's your sign to start today. And I'm here for you. And I bet the OCD community is here for you to like get you through those first steps for sure. Oh, burnout. This is a really great question. I've been not engaging with my OCD, but the constant thoughts are giving me burnout, even with positive thoughts. What are some ways to deal with burnout? Okay, so I am the queen of burnout. I I love burnout in terms of acknowledging it because I really think it's poignant to so many facets of who we are, right? Burnout tends to be an accumulation of mental health exhaustion, maybe intrusive thoughts, maybe issues we're having in our lives, like some of the main stressors, like financial, career stressors, stressing with family and children or with parents, schooling and academia. And burnout really is like an encapsulation of who we are and how we're feeling and our body media of happiness and our emotional level. So burnout can mean a lot of things. I'm gonna be honest. Today I took like 3 naps and I'm exhausted. I I feel so tired when I relapse or when I have a slew of intrusive thoughts. And even on the good weeks when I actually find my OCD voice is pretty quiet and I'm handling therapy really well, I'm still exhausted sometimes. And there are days I don't want to get out of bed. And there's days I have to force myself, like take a shower, take baby steps. So I totally get this. So the first thing I would recommend that this is what I always do is just like what I was saying about OCD a few minutes ago. I want to figure out the full sphere of what I'm dealing with. I want to see all three dimensions. I don't want to just say, you know what, I think it's my intrusive thoughts. Because chances are, at least for me, there's a lot of contributing factors. And really breaking down what's causing those for you, what's causing your burnout, I think is imperative. So grab a piece of paper, grab a notebook, wherever you feel like a safe space to write. And maybe being in private is the best way to do this if you have people around you all the time or be in a safe and comfortable environment is writing out what things you think are contributing to your burnout. You can write OCD, you can write intrusive thoughts, you can write anxiety, but I want to push you, encourage you further. Like, are you getting enough sleep? Have good blood work recently where you can see if you have any vitamin deficiencies and underlying cases. Have you had your annual checkups with, if you're a woman, if you've had your woman's health checkup, if you've had your annual PCP checkup, if you've been to the dentist, all little things like that that can be contributing factors to our emotional stress. And then write down any like work stressors or family stressors or unresolved questions or things and goals you'd like to set Body, gut, mind, like those are all very connected. I believe like the food that I eat and the amount of sugar and caffeine that I have really contributes to my OCD health. That's just for me. I can't speak for anyone else. Um, Kind of like creating that sphere and seeing what's potentially feeding you burnout. And you'll find within that list that there's probably actionable steps you can start taking to address some of those things. And the biggest actionable step you can take right now is burnout happens. Exhaustion happens. It can be a bummer sometimes. I'll have a whole week where I'm just tired and unproductive. And the first step of that is that's okay. You are allowed to go through that season. And it really can be an encouraging time because it can be a signifier that I need to make some small changes or I need to make a big change. Full transparency, guys, I'm going on medical leave from work next week on Monday. When I attempted suicide, I went to work 3 days later. And it took the healing and the questions and diagnosis all the more longer to find out, and I really learned from that that I'm allowed to lean into, at least my case, the benefits that I have to create that space to not go deep into burnout because I am there too right now. And, making some radical changes for your health takes precedence. If that means having a hard conversation with a family member or significant other, do it. If that means taking some mental health days from work, do it. If that means controlling your finances and meeting with an accountant who can like walk you through your financial stressors and like give you that consultation, do it. If it means making that annual appointment with your doctor and your blood work appointment that you've been putting off for so long, now's your sign to do it. When we take action, that is the immediate remedy for burnout because we're fighting it. And also burnout is like, I find a good formula as action mixed with rest. So like acknowledging the rest that you need, taking like physical rest, mental rest, and breaks, and then mixing that with like actionable steps that can prevent me from going into burnout again and really doing an analysis of like what put me here in the first place. And I think that's huge too. Like coming up with like a little body history, a mind history, whether it's with or without your OCD, what got me here? And what can I do to prevent this again? That's so powerful, guys, when we can learn from our past mistakes and our history. So I just want to encourage you just a couple little avenues there and like break out a piece of paper. And like if you want to do it in bed with your favorite cup of coffee or like tea or whatnot, like it's a great first step to kind of come up with your spear and your compass. Oh my gosh, so many questions, guys. I just want to like answer all of you. Okay. I have kind of some two similar questions from again Daily Arca and Hi and TL. I feel like this is a extension from what I talked about, but I'm seeing a couple people with this question. I'll put yours up, Daily Arca, but it's a continuation. So you're asking how many sessions in will they start ERP? How does therapy look like at the start? What would they spend a few sessions for history and stuff or dive right into ERP? There's also questions regarding feeling better or worse for ERP. So maybe I should just walk you guys through a little bit of what those first steps look like. So I'm seeing some redundancy in questions. So let's just start there. I'm gonna take down this question. We're just going to chat real quick about what ERP looks like in the beginning. And I hope this does encourage people that are on the fence or feeling kind of unsure, just want to know what that looks like. I went in completely blind. And when I say blind, I did not know what intrusive thoughts were. I've never even heard of the word before stepping into therapy. I had no idea what OCD was. I had only heard about it in the cultural societal stigma sense of OCD is when you, have to organize colors and are like, you know, germophobic. Okay. I had the derogatory stigmatized version of OCD in my head, which was my own fault. And I'm so glad to be educated now and to be speaking truth into this community because this is a suffering community. So I walked into an OCD office not knowing what to do. I just knew I was desperate. I was really fighting for my life and I needed help. And intrusive thoughts for me, the word popped up on a search at 3 a.m. when I was rapidly looking for help. And I was just searching. And an NGO that is similar to this company was promoting a bunch of articles and resources. And I contributed to saving my life. And they talked about intrusive thoughts. And that was the first time I learned. So literally, guys, like 3 days before therapy, I was just now getting into this environment. So for all of you here that might be on the fence, like you are amazing. Like you are here on an OCD live stream. Like you are so much more equipped than I was walking in. And I told you that first appointment where I was shell shocked. So here's the thing. I've been to a lot of therapists in my life, and I've also seen a handful of OCD specialists as I've moved and adapted and tried to find a better fit. And a good OCD therapist for me, has a background in OCD. I saw so many therapists that did not have an OCD background at all, and I found it took me longer to get a diagnosis. So the first step is finding someone that is certified or has an existing patient history with OCD, particularly not just anxiety, if you feel strongly that OCD is something you're struggling with. And they're gonna do a pretty big workup. Now, all the terminology, depending on the state or region or country that you're in, varies. However, for me, my first appointment was just like a get to know you appointment. It was an intake. They're usually even sometimes a little longer or shorter for your intake, depending on your provider. And it was just talking about life. They wanted to get a immediate pulse check as to like who I am, what do I do for an occupation, how old am I, what is my family history, and all things like that. The next appointment for me got a little more intense, and your therapist should, if they haven't, they should do this. Is they kind of lay out the roadmap for you of how many sessions, what each session is going to entail, and in the sense of the beginning steps. So like, okay, we're going to have 2 whole sessions on questionnaires where I'm just going to ask you all these required questions to get a proper diagnosis. And for me, I also did a questionnaire that was the acronym, and I don't know it off the top of my head, was the SUD scale. And it was essentially listing out kind of a spectrum of like where my OCD lied on a scale of 1 to 100 in terms of the severity of it, as well as, figuring out the specific subtypes I was dealing with. And they also like to rule out other potential anxiety related disorders. So I was tested for bipolar disorder, split personality disorder, um, mood disorder, and all the things. And if that sounds scary to you, that's okay because it sounded really scary to me at first and it was no big deal and they were just normal questions. Your OCD will try to tell you that you have like you're manic and you're like a sociopath and you're a serial killer because mine did. Keep going, keep pushing through those questionnaires, express to your therapist that you are struggling with some of the questions and some of them are triggering for you. I cried a couple times talking about my suicide attempts and some childhood triggers, and that's okay. Like sometimes it's really easy for one person and really hard for the next, but keep powering through. And your therapist on the sidelines will start building up this customizable ERP plan. And that's why I think this community is so amazing because it really requires someone that's willing to go in with a fine tooth comb and make a plan that's so specific to you. And that might be a mix of CBT therapy, EDMR potentially. That's another resource that I might be actually going under this month, which is a really cool therapy path I haven't tried before. There's a lot of different like pieces that they can combine with your exposure therapies and really build up that plan for you. It might take a handful of sessions depending on how long you've had OCD, how old you are. Really all depends. But the number one thing is showing up and being committed and trusting your therapist that they're going to build a wonderful plan for you. And it's going to be kind of changed along the way. My exposure plan has been like adjusted where I have more or less or different ones. And sometimes I'll just have a talk therapy session, like if I just need a breather and like a life catch up. And then my exposure plan changes based on what I invited to speak with my therapist with. So I cannot give you a number like it's going to be 4 appointments before your exposure therapy starts. What I can tell you is leaning into that trust and that relationship you build with your therapist and letting them guide you with their expertise and knowledge and their excitement to get you into a better place. And that's going to be where your path starts. So for exposure therapies for me, oh my gosh, guys, it was so hard at the beginning because I was in such a distressful state. I thought I was dying. I remember feeling like I had no friends and no support, and I could barely do my bodily functions. And because I was so new to the process, I didn't really ask for help because I'm afraid to ask for help sometimes, not just from a professional, but from like family and friends to caretake for me and be there for me. So I did the dumb thing of shutting everyone out and not really talking about what I was doing. And I kept powering through work and I really didn't set myself up for success. So I'd like to encourage you that if you're starting exposure therapies, treat it like any other illness. Okay, guys? Don't just like throw it on your calendar and be like, good. No, you need to set up yourself for success. And that will look like having the hard conversations with loved ones and saying, I'm about to do something that's very important. And I might need your support. I might need you to come over and have dinner with me more so I'm not alone. I might need you to look at my reassurance list that I've made and not lean into that conversation with me if you can. Asking people to assist you with life because life is hard. Taking those days off of work, finding someone to maybe cover for a night so you and your spouse or your significant other can go out and they can watch the kids and you can get a breath of fresh air. Like, really treating this like you are going for a lifestyle change because that is what it is. Exposure therapies, in my opinion, is not a one and done. You're not going to go through this in a month and be like, I'm good, I'm great. Um, this is like starting a new eating plan. This is like starting a new exercise plan. Take it with your full mind, body, soul, put it in your calendar, dedicate that time to it because it will get hard. And there's going to be times where you swear you can't go any further. And there's going to be times you swear you've hit your limit. And that is when you need to push a little bit further because that means it's working and your OCD is fighting you and your mind is making new thought processes. And that is so cool. Like, we have the ability to rechannel our mind and encourage ourselves to like push through and think differently and become more powerful than a disorder that has had so much control and pain in our lives. And I remember after about a month or 2 months, I was pretty exhausted, felt pretty beat down, but I was, like, sitting outside and it was 2 in the morning, and I just looked up at the stars and I was like, "I did this. Like, I've overcome something that has tormented me since I was a child. This thing that controlled me that I didn't give a name to, that I couldn't give a name to, that doctors would only give me 8 minutes a day, and they were like, 'You know what? Like, you just have anxiety,' or, 'You know what? You're a woman, you're hormonal.'" Like, I figured out what it was, I'm with the right professional help, I'm getting treatment for it, I'm here. I'm here right now and I'm doing it and I'm becoming stronger. I'm growing in this and now I can be equipped to help other people. And that day does come. You just have to show up. That's the first step. Is show up for yourself, create, a life around success for exposure therapy. And it is normal for it to get hard and it's normal for it to get easy and then hard again. Like, this is part of you growing and manifesting. And as someone in recovery, I can say like exposures are not as hard anymore. And I still have a couple things I need to do. Like, I still can't drive a car, guys. Like, I'm terrified of driving a car, and I still have not gotten behind the wheel yet. Like, that's something I'm gonna have to do. But there's so many things I can do now that I couldn't do before. I can watch scary movies. I can read news reports about like a murder, a local murder or shooting. Like, I can do those things. I can have hard conversations with my significant other that I struggle with before about our relationship. I know reassurance from my OCD, and you will get there. And I promise you, it's worth taking that first step. And I'm so glad that I did. Oh, I'm glad you found this live stream too. I am located in Connecticut for anyone that is a local Connecticut-y, but I was previously in New York City. I wanna read all of your guys' things. Like, thank you for like giving me a glimpse into your life and like some of your intrusive thoughts. Um, this is interesting. Anything physical I can do to help with OCD? I am starting a journey this month in particular to try and really focus now that I have a more controlled synopsis over my brain and I have a really good regimen with exposure therapy. I've become really intrigued and excited about the art of the body and how that feeds or changes my OCD and mental health and anxiety. So, for me, what I found is amazing is working with a PCP, working with a naturopath, working with a nutritionist, whatever is most accessible and, feels best to you, and really coming up with like a lifestyle plan that can really accommodate your anxiety treatments and your exposure treatments. And I find when we go after both, we're really demonstrating to our OCD and our body that we care about both sides of ourselves, the mind and the body. And for me, it's three. It's also the spirit because I lean into my church community quite a bit. So for me, the physical stuff that's been amazing is um, being really disciplined with my workouts and also being gracious when that discipline fails because it does fail sometimes. And really leaning into your physical education, lean into a friend, lean into a family member that might have more physical experience with running or getting started on a spin bike or taking a workout class or starting yoga. I'm someone with disabilities, actually. I'm partially paralyzed on my left side. I have minor cerebral palsy and I have pretty weak lungs. So the physical stuff was really hard for me. And I used to make a lot of excuses and I had a lot of fears. So I can understand it if you're someone that has a fear outside of OCD of just working out, of taking that step to be more regimented with your body. But I can promise you that like getting that education, just like getting education for your OCD can really, really have a huge impact in that process. And for me, I reduced my sugar intake, I reduced my caffeine levels. Sometimes I have seasons where I indulge, but on a regimented scale, I'm usually pretty even. So, like focusing on your nutrition in whatever way seems fit for you, whether that's a specific diet plan or just eliminating certain foods, working with a nutritionist or a naturopath to see if there's anything like stimulating you in a negative way, if there's inflammation in your gut or body that can be causing an additional level of anxiety can really be beneficial. And then there's a million other techniques we can do, going down to the breathing techniques. The square breathing technique is wonderful. If you're into meditating, if you're into prayer, mindfulness tools, and your therapist can definitely give you this. There's also a great amount of books in bookstores these days, guys, for a lot of like physical healthy things we can do, from journaling to um, making gratitude lists to doing yoga and all those things. And it's really just finding the best fit for you and taking that first step and being okay with being in a state of experimentation. And that when you're with OCD, like, guys, life becomes so experimentory. It can be exciting and terrifying at the same time. You're experimenting with a new lifestyle, a new way to potentially eat or sleep, new like supplements that your therapist or doctor might have you take, new medications you might be taking, like a new way of communicating, a new way of learning. Like these are all things that OCD kind of cracks open wide. And I find the best thing I can do is be optimistic about exploring all those things. So I don't want to get too granular in the details of like physical things, because that can mean so many things. But I find like a combination of like having rest days, working out, having facets of mindfulness. I see a couple comments about headaches. My OCD gives me headaches, and lean into your medical system if you can to see if it's anything more specific or underlying, because that can be the case. But for me, it's like staying super hydrated and like having like non-addictive medications or supplements that can like ease those symptoms. And again, like working with certified people to get you in that direction and not be afraid of communicating those fears is awesome. I just love reading all y'all's comments. Thank you for sharing. Some of the questions you guys are asking, I don't have experience with, so I don't want to speak to it directly. But I know we have a lot of live streams, and NOCD has a lot of resources. I would absolutely encourage you to go and lean into for the specifics. I don't want to speak to an OCD that I've never had personally. I'm seeing a lot of comments about religious OCD. While I have had some like OCD related to some like sin and guilt just through my own religious walk. Um, I haven't had it directly, but I do know someone that did, and unfortunately, it just progressed for them, and it was really challenging. And really, that progression came from a fear of opening up to their church community and opening up to their therapist about the religious OCD. So, while I'm not going to speak to it directly, I would encourage you that like taking that first step is so important, and like not being afraid of your church community and the people that love you, or getting too caught up in the conversation of sin and the conversations we have with God, to prevent you from getting exposure therapy, because exposure therapy works, guys, and it is an invitation for all OCD types and subtypes, the taboo, the less common, whatever you're struggling with, like your OCD has a place in exposure therapy, and your therapist has a plan for you, and that is possible. And any thoughts that you're dealing with, those intrusive thoughts, like we can work through those. Your community, your advocates, your therapist, the closest ones to you, your church community, um, and whomever is closest to you. Like I just want to invite you to take that first step if you're struggling, particularly. Oh my gosh, guys, I love all your questions. Lena, I am super intrigued with your I'm trying to catch up to your question, so I apologize. Um, you're sort of doing ERP with exposing parts of yourself and trying to sit during it, even though it's terrifying for me, while saying it's at least semi-present. Elena, are you referring to, like, you're doing exposure for yourself, like, in your own safe space and not working with a therapist? I just wanna kinda give an understanding of, like, what your question is exactly, just so I answer correctly. If you wanna type out what you mean, because I wanna help you out. I wanna answer your question. Jesse, this is interesting because I can kind of relate to the suddenness. What can cause sudden OCD? I've never struggled with OCD the way I am now, but it happened so suddenly. Anyone else experience that? Like I said, mine came on from really since I can remember. Once I could give OCD a name, I was like, oh my gosh, I've had this since I was 3 years old. But I can say my harm OCD um, came out of nowhere. How this happened for me, guys, was I was kind of in a state of distress and anxiety. I felt overstimulated, which was a pretty norm for me. This was pre knowing what OCD was and that I had it. And I was chopping up tomatoes in the kitchen, and my mom had guests over, and I was visiting home, for the first time in a while from New York, and I was just hanging out, and my dog jumped up on the counter, which is something that she does. I have a golden retriever who's my best friend, and she jumped up on the counter with her paws, and I was right there cutting tomatoes, and I had an intrusive thought of, like, stabbing my dog, and I was so horrified that I, like, dropped the knife, and I just ran upstairs and, like, went to bed and, like, put the covers on my head and, like, closed the door. I was so distressed, and that was the day, that was the beginning of the end, if you will, for my harm OCD. That was when it started. That was when my journey really began, and I started taking OCD seriously. And I do remember the suddenness of that moment. And I don't have a scientific answer for you, Jesse, but what I can say is, like, it happens. Our brains can make these neurological connections, and sometimes they can't be undone. But what it did do for me is it really addressed that I had OCD my whole life. I have this anxiety problem that I really wasn't taking seriously. I just kept saying, "I don't know any different, so I'm just gonna live out my life and continue moving forward." And that's that. OCD and that harm facet and that what the scene I just described was the first day I realized that my mental health was worth taking seriously and that a better life was out there. And I don't have to tolerate the panic attacks and the dry heaving in the toilet for 18 years. I don't have to live that life. Like, I have control to educate myself and learn how to change the dynamic of my lifestyle. And so I do understand the suddenness and how that can be so jarring. And I'm so sorry if you had OCD come onto you suddenly. And I can truly appreciate how life-changing it was, because OCD doesn't just change, the intrusive thoughts in our heads, but it also, like, makes us change ourselves. And we have to have new conversations, meet new people, new doctors, read new things, have different types of safeguards in place, and do different types of just lifestyle choices and potentially food and physical, like, boundaries. Like, we have this disorder now that we have to navigate and coexist with. So it can be jarring, but usually, for at least from my research and understanding, like, it is catapulted from an anxiety situation. So you may have been grappling with anxiety for a long time. You may have been dealing with an anxiety disorder for a long time, and your body was throwing this as a way to give attention. Your OCD was presenting itself, and I'm definitely sorry you're dealing with that, but I hope you're in a safe space now and that you can get the help that you need. And it's really great that you're having an OCD conversation, because unlike myself, you're aware that it's probably OCD and you're going to take the steps to do the right type of professional help, and that's pretty wonderful. Uh, Darla here's in response to Jesse, confirming, yeah, sudden. I have to say, thinking back to my childhood, like, my first intrusive thoughts were about, like, I'd be like this little kid running around, and I would, like, light a candle in my like little playroom area corner thing, and, like, I'd be so paranoid that, oh my gosh, what if I left the candle lit and it burned the house down and my parents died? Or I used to be so paranoid, like, when my parents left me home alone, even for like an hour, I'd call like 5 times, like, oh my gosh, you must have died in a car accident. It's been an hour, when they were just getting groceries. And, like, I'd always panic call my parents if I heard like an ambulance. I go, oh my gosh, it was definitely like my friend, like, she's dead in the ambulance. And I'd be so convinced, and I would get panic attacks from, like, ambulance sounds and all things like that. So those are my earliest memories of OCD, and they really came out of nowhere as well. Again, I had an extremely anxiety-based past. I was a premature baby, so I was born 3 months early, and I was always overstimulated and always anxious, and that was kind of the destiny I was meant to walk. sudden is definitely the word for OCD, and I think that's the tool it likes to use throughout our entire walks with OCD. It loves to presume itself in the suddenness, and it loves to really grab you at any moment. And I remember the biggest step I had to take in my exposure therapy was just being okay with that and accepting that OCD is going to present itself on like some of my happiest moments. And I have to learn how to coexist and walk with that and feel safe to communicate that with others and again redefine my happiness, redefine like my expectations in a day. So I definitely hear that. um I'm sure my like OCD will rear its head on like some of the happiest days of my life, like when I get married or if I have kids or things like that. Daily art grind says the same thing. Mine went from 0 to 100 when I was 24. Random thought while showering. Yep, yep. And I couldn't calm down either. I was like in a complete panic. So I totally get this. But I promise you, like you're taking the amazing correct steps now, and that is wonderful. And I'm so proud of everyone here for tuning in and getting educated. That really is the number one thing to take OCD's power away is getting educated on like how it works and how it functions. And so you guys are just doing something amazing right now, and I'm so excited for you and where you're gonna go. Trying to see. Again, I'm trying to avoid the reassurance questions. Sorry, guys. A couple people are asking about affordable therapy, and while I've navigated kind of some series of this in my life, but I just want to encourage you that NOCD actually has a ton of amazing and free resources, including a free support group that you guys can jump over and find on their website. I am joining one this week, and I'm so excited. I've never been in a support group that's related to OCD, and I am over the moon. So I'll be there, guys, if you want to come and say hi. But finding free resources is a great first step. Again, like stuff like this, like getting your education down, awesome. Like you are amazing. You're doing the right thing. Like reading into those free resources is a great place to start. And usually I find like if you outwardly converse your needs to people, whether it's like your loved ones, a friend, a stranger, a coworker, like maybe some people you'll meet in the support group if you choose to join, like doors open. And like it's amazing how like they can connect you to different things and different resources that you didn't know were there before, and like you will find the steps to get where you need to go and like get over that financial barrier if you can. And I think that's pretty amazing. Like I would not have met the people I met without like outwardly having the conversations. Like don't be afraid to express your needs. Like, hey, I need an OCD therapist. Like, and they're like, oh, you know what? My cousin uses this group in practice, and like they happen to be in network, or they happen to have like a financial security plan. So like the I can't give you guys like a direct direct answer, but what I can say is like don't be afraid to talk about it. Don't be afraid to open yourself up to that universe and like keep saying what you need outwardly, and you'll be amazed like what opportunities present themselves. Hannah, I cannot answer your question directly because I don't have the background, but I know NOCD is a great group of people. And even if you don't know if ERP will work for you, even if you don't know if OCD is a regimen of what you need to deal with, take that first step because I think you're here for a reason, and let them guide you and kind of put you in and turn you into the correct place. So if it's not here, if it's not ERP and exposure therapy, everyone is so well rounded and the community is really here for you, and like I'd encourage you to reach out and take that first step regardless, and they can help you get into the right place and the right treatment plan, which I think is pretty amazing. So for anyone that's also unsure if exposure therapy is for them, like go to that intake appointment, start to get to know therapists. Like it's actually a pretty tight knit community, and it's amazing. Like my first OCD therapist like knew another therapist that I was like a big fan of in the books that they had written. So again, like always taking that first step is key for this journey. So I definitely would encourage you to do that. So we have a few minutes left, guys, and my laptop is at like 2%. So I'm going to close out a few minutes early, but I am going to plug myself a little bit if you don't mind. I'm super friendly, and hopefully that shows through this live stream. But I love chatting with you guys. A lot of you reached out to me personally last week, which just like moved my heart and like changed my world. And I love having these side conversations. I was having some long like direct message conversations with some of you, which is awesome. And I'm totally open to that. So if you want to get a hold of me, if you want to follow me, my handle is Sun with Sundays. I am on Instagram. I'm in the YouTube space. I launched a YouTube channel that's just for OCD, intrusive thoughts, mental health, Christianity, all those things. Please reach out on Instagram and say hi, like just direct message me, and I will try to get back to you if I see it. I'm also starting a podcast, and I just launched that, which is again going to be about intrusive thoughts, OCD, mental health, anxiety, life, Christianity, if those things reach out to you. So I'm on YouTube, I'm on Spotify, all in